I'm going to use this term instructional capacity. So I'm looking out at the room, and is that a jargony educational research word, or is that something you say in schools? Instructional capacity. I'm not seeing a lot of nodding heads. Well, let me talk about how I think about it. When I started looking at the Coatsen program, I immediately connected it to this idea of instructional capacity, which I think is really interesting research literature. This is the dictionary definition of capacity: the ability or power to do, experience, or understand something. The thing that I find very useful about the idea of capacity is it's not task specific. So it's not you're good at doing this one thing. You're not good at implementing this curriculum or doing this program. Capacity means the ability to learn from your work, to understand the work you're doing, and continuously improve it. And I think this idea of instructional capacity is really key to the way that the Coatsen program works. So when I look at this literature on capacity-driven strategies for changing schools and changing districts, a couple of key themes. So capacity-driven strategies build the ability of people and teams in a system to understand, implement, and learn from the change. So not just to carry it out, not just to follow orders, but everybody in the system really understanding how this thing they're doing works and learning from it along the way. And crucially, strategies like this, and I think the Coatsen strategy is a good model of this, invest in supports for both individual and collective learning. So it's a lot about how do we learn together, and that being greater than the sum of its parts. And I would say that it contrasts to another prevalent strategy for school reform, which is more of a compliance-driven approach, where change is motivated by rules, rewards, and sanctions. And sometimes the best way to figure out what we're talking about is to define what we're not talking about. So I want to contrast the idea of capacity to another model of school change, which I would refer to as the incentives model. And we're all familiar with this. I think No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, had a lot of this DNA in their thinking about how people change and how institutions change. So the incentives model for school change is powered by have to. Here are the things we're going to do. You have to do it. Teachers need to try harder. There's this assumption that people know what we need to do to have every child achieve, and that people just need to be pushed to try a little harder to do it. In this model, the role of teachers or the role of leaders tends to be working on teachers to reform them rather than working with them. The level of change is very much individual. We're focusing on individual teachers. Certainly the kinds of sanctions and accountability practices we saw with No Child Left Behind, very focused on individuals. Change tends to happen from the top down. And the curriculum, to get really nitty-gritty, curriculum in this kind of a model tends to be shaped by textbooks. Because again, the idea is we need to tell people exactly what to do and then set up a system of rewards and punishments to make sure that they do it. So I'd like to contrast that to the capacity building model. And I think, again, Coatsen, this is how I think of how Coatsen works in districts. The Coatsen model and the capacity building model generally in districts is powered not by have to, but by know-how, investing in the know-how of every person in the system so that they can learn more and pool their knowledge. The role of leaders is to work with teachers to reform the system. The level of change is very much collective. Change happens more from the bottom up by building shared agreements about what effective instruction looks like. And the curriculum in this kind of model is shaped much more by informed professional expertise. So teachers who really understand the practices that they're implementing and use that professional judgment to respond to the needs of their students. In your packets, you have a short lit review that we put together to help explain why does COTSN do what it does? How has this program evolved over the years? And what kinds of change strategies does it use? We put this together by looking at the research literature on effective professional development. So what kind of professional development truly makes a difference for the learning of students? And each of these headlines on the slide is a section header in that lit review. So you can easily go in and see some of the specific studies that are cited. And we're going to be making this available on the COTSN website, hopefully with some links to the relevant literature if you want to go a little deeper in some of this. But the research base that COTSN is drawing on starts with the idea that U.S. teachers tend to lack effective professional growth opportunities, especially if you compare American teachers to teachers in other developed nations. The statistics are quite startling. American teachers spend way more time directly instructing their students and way less time working with their colleagues to craft and improve their practice. And when they do have opportunities for professional development, the research shows that it's much more often single workshop style events with external consultants rather than working within that community of practice. So the second headline here is that the PD that works needs to be sustained and it needs to be embedded in real instructional contexts. So, the short way to say this is that the research is very clear that one-shot workshops simply don't work. Teachers need to be grappling with ideas over a period of time where they can engage in this cycle of plan, do, act, reflect, and embed it in their real instructional contexts. Related to that, the research is very clear that teachers need support for transferring that learning to their classrooms. So you can have the greatest workshop in the world about the most exciting instructional practice, but if teachers go back to their classrooms and don't implement that practice, it's obviously not having any impact on student learning. And I want to be really clear here that this is not a knock on teachers when I say that, because teachers are asked to do so many things. And sometimes it's really hard to figure out, how is this new thing that you're asking me to do, how does that fit into all the other things that you're asking me to do? And so the binder goes up on the shelf. So COTSN addresses that. I think one of the most powerful things about how COTSN works is the idea of coupling really high quality professional development with a coach who is going through that with you and is there as a thought partner, is there to plan with you, encourage you, maybe sometimes give you a little nudge if you need that to implement that. And that's very congruent with what we see in the literature. Another important point is that adult learners need choice and voice. The COTSN program definitely has that opt-in aspect, understanding that teachers are much more likely to invest the time and be willing to take risks if it's something that they've chosen to do. Another thing there's strong support in this literature for is that great coaches are made, not born. I think there's often an assumption that great teachers are automatically great coaches, and I think those of you who are great teachers and great coaches in the room know that transition is not necessarily automatic, that working with adult learners is a different game, and that's why COTSN invests so much in developing their coaches and their mentors. Change happens in professional communities. The literature is very clear on that PD needs to be something that we do collectively so that we have those thought partners. And that's why COTSN works with cohorts of teachers in schools. And then the final section of this lit review looks a little bit at what I would characterize as pedagogy that is teaching for understanding. Over the years, COTSN's professional development has come to focus more and more on a set of instructional practices like Reader's Workshop, Writer's Workshop, CGI Math, where teachers step really into this more of a facilitator role. And it's about creating a classroom community of inquiry, following the lead of your learners, And the literature on that is quite strong. The teachers who teach that way, it leads to greater student efficacy, students understanding that they can solve their own problems and find a way through, them being more engaged in their learning, and ultimately student achievement. So that's just a quick overview of the research base that supports what Coatsen does. So let's get into some research that we've been doing specifically on the impacts of the Coatsen program. How does the art of teaching build instructional capacity? And we're going to start at that classroom level. Where does increased capacity show up? And we're talking now specifically about the direct participants in the Coatsen program, so the fellows and the mentor. And there are two big buckets of change that we found in the research. One is obviously classroom practice, shifts in teaching practices. But the other, equally important, and I think these two feed each other, is the idea of professional practice. Teachers' roles as professional educators, how they see their expertise and their willingness and desire to share that expertise to have an impact beyond their classroom. So we'll look at some of those impacts. So we started this work with a series of focus groups, and some of you in the room were in those focus groups, helped us kind of lay the groundwork for this by asking alumni fellows and alumni mentors about what the long-term impacts of having been in a Coatsen cohort had been on them. And these are some of the things we found in those two big areas of classroom change and change in professional roles. In the classroom, fellows and mentors talked about knowing students better and therefore being able to differentiate their instruction more effectively and therefore reaching more kids. Stepping into that role of teacher as facilitator, giving up some of the control and letting students take the lead. Teaching with a lot of questioning and inquiry and building student ownership of their learning. On the professional side, teachers talked about how the Coatsen program was a revitalizing experience for them, how for some of them it kept them in the profession. For some of them it was a change of career path. I know some of you in the room have moved on based on that experience to roles as coaches, roles as principals. The fact that it gave you an ongoing, and this room today is evidence of that, professional network full of resources. The idea that participants felt, it's not enough for me just to be great in my classroom. I want to share what I'm doing with other teachers. So that obligation to share and making my practice public, and often being involved more formally in school and district level decisions. So we started with the focus groups to kind of map the terrain of the impact of being in the Coatsen program. From there, we did a survey of the entire Coatsen alumni population going back over a decade. How long? Yeah, going back about a decade. But anyone who'd ever been in a Coatsen cohort from the beginning, mentors and fellows. So the next couple of slides you'll see are some data from that survey of alumni. This is kind of small, and I apologize about it. I probably should have broken this up into a couple of slides. But starting in the classroom, we're going to start in the classroom. What do fellows tell us about the impact on their classroom practice? And I want to mention, the thing I really want to highlight about this slide is this was a 5-point scale. We asked for each of these things, so from asking questions that elicit student thinking to creating assessments that inform my teaching. How big of an impact did your Coatsen experience have on your ability to do that? And the scale went from 1, which was no impact, up through minor, moderate, major. And what you're seeing here is just the very top category, the people who said, this program had a transformational impact on this aspect of my classroom practice. I've never used that category on a survey before. I usually just stop at major. The reason that I did that was that I heard in so many of the focus groups, people used that word, transformational. It transformed the way I teach. And I had a feeling that I wanted people to be able to express that and to differentiate that from major impacts. So you can see here that some of the most transformational impacts are very much aligned with that idea of teaching for understanding. So 45% of alumni fellows said that the Coats-In program had a transformational impact on their ability to ask questions that elicit student thinking. And related to that, 44% transformational impact on knowing my students as individual learners, acting as a facilitator of learning, all of those things. So on the next slide, you're still going to see this in the orange, the transformational, and then we're adding on the percent who said major. And what you can see here is that across the board, across this full range of classroom practices, between 70 and 90% of alumni reported at least major impacts in all of these aspects of their classroom practice. And I'll mention here that for the first time this year, this is all retrospective data, right? This is people who may have gone through the program years ago, reflecting back. This year, we're starting with some of the schools and districts in this room in new Coats-In cohorts and gathering data from teachers just as they're starting the program, so that we're going to be able to really report on their growth in real time. The really exciting news, and this is something I didn't necessarily expect, is that the shifts in practice, teachers tell us, are not limited to that focused content area. So as most of you know, in the Coats-In program, fellows choose a specific content area to focus on for 2 years. And I think sometimes principals have a question about that. Elementary teachers have a lot of subject areas, a lot of teaching responsibilities. Do we really want to invest all that time and all that PD for 2 whole years in one subject area? Is that really a wise way to go? And I think this answers that question. What you see is that 51% of the alumni reported my entire style of teaching changed across content areas. And an additional 38% said, well, the focus area changed the most, but there were significant shifts in others. And based on interviews and focus groups, I'm pretty confident that what's going on here is teachers, once they step into that different role of being a facilitator of learning and see the impact that that has on their students, they don't want to limit that just to when they're doing reading workshop or just when they're doing CGI math. Several people said in almost these exact words, I want to teach like that all day. You know, now that I see how that works, why would I not teach like that all day? In terms of student learning impacts, use the same scale of no impact up to transformational, and similar range. We found that 70 to 90% of alumni fellows reported major or transformational impacts on their students in everything from the range of strategies that those kids felt that they could bring to the table, so their efficacy, their engagement in learning, their ability to collaborate with their peers. The research we're doing this year, and I'm really excited about this, we're collecting data directly from students in those Coats-In classrooms, and we have comparison classrooms, so we're asking these same questions of students who are not in Coats-In classrooms. So we'll be able to look over the 2 years, how does students' experience of instruction in some of these areas change, and what does that change look like in Coats-In classrooms? And it's a nationally normed survey, so I think I'm really excited to see what the students themselves tell us about what it's like to be in a Coats-In classroom. Beyond the classroom, Coats-In has a range of lasting effects on teachers' professional confidence and identity. So this is a question where we ask teachers to alumni fellows to rate themselves twice. In the orange, they said, how well does this statement describe me at the beginning of the program? And in the darker, in the red, how well does it describe me now? And this might be 5, 6, 7 years out of the program. And these are small, so I'm gonna just make sure everyone can see these. If a student is struggling, I'm confident I can find a way to help them. Others in my school or district recognize that I have valuable expertise. I see myself as a leader. Big changes there. I have a broad repertoire of instructional techniques. I feel a responsibility to help other teachers in my building learn and grow. And I have a strong professional network of people I can go to for ideas. So each one of those is something that I would describe as a capacity, as something that is helping not only that teacher, but that entire school and ultimately that entire district learn from their teaching and continue to improve. So how does the CodeSyn program do that? What did the fellows tell us about how they achieve these impacts? We had a question where we listed 12 of the specific components of the CodeSyn program and said which 3 had the biggest impact on your program. So 2/3 of them had in their top 3 observing practice in other classrooms. 60% had in their top 3 the CodeSyn sponsored professional development in their content areas, and 48% had in their top 3 working through coaching cycles with my mentor. So obviously all 3 of those are tightly intertwined. But I think this could be useful as you as schools and districts reflect throughout the day about how you invest in professional learning. To hear from teachers, what was it about the CodeSyn program that was so transformational? So I want to finish this section, and then we're going to have an opportunity for some conversation with a summary of how the CodeSyn program reflects research characteristics of effective professional development. What is it about the art of teaching that matches up with what we know? And some of this is in that lit review about effective professional development. So effective professional development has a specific content focus, which is why in the art of teaching, fellows focus on a specific content area for 2 full years. Effective professional development involves active learning, and that's why in the CodeSyn program, teachers are constantly, every week, applying their new learning immediately in their classrooms with the support of their coaches. Effective PD is coherent, and the part of the CodeSyn program that reflects coherence the best, I think, is that the PD experiences, the classroom observations, and the coaching are all tied to individual professional growth targets. So teachers are constantly going back to that professional growth target and thinking about what do I need to learn and what do I need to do to get there. Effective PD has duration. It's, again, not a one-shot workshop. In the CodeSyn program, fellows receive hundreds of hours of PD and mentoring over those 2 years. And again, collective participation. So I want to get you talking with each other about these ideas of capacity and how you in your schools and districts invest in professional learning. So the question I want to put out to you, and I'll ask each table to appoint a recorder and a reporter, because we're going to have tables report out in about 15 minutes. Think about your own school or district's professional learning system, thinking about these ideas that I've shared about professional development that builds capacity, that teaches, it's a teaching you to fish kind of thing. What practices or investments do you feel like you're already doing that fit that build capacity, and what ones do you have that maybe don't so much? We're going to be talking throughout the day about the shape of your own professional learning systems. So I'll give you 10, 15 minutes to talk about that, and then have you share out some ideas.
Yeah, and let us know which district you're from as well.
Good morning, we're from Monrovia Unified, and I think we've been really blessed to have been benefited from a relationship with CodeSyn. So a lot of the initial trainings, coachings that our alumni and fellows went through have bled over and impacted what we have as a 5-year professional development plan that all new teachers, whether they're new to teaching or new to our district, go through. And so they do get the benefit from being in a cohort, from coaching inside the classroom, from choice PD throughout the school years. I think what we're really working on getting better at is when we send teachers to something that's not in-house, to a conference, to a convention, how do we connect that back to the learning at the school site and really have the same bleeding effect instructionally with that capacity that we have when we have something inside and we're able to support it from the beginning, reflect afterwards, and then really have that application in the classroom. So we're trying to balance those two, the things we did great inside and how we can connect that same learning staff to when teachers go outside and come back to us. How do we get the same momentum from that?
Great job. Did you talk about anything at your table that you feel like you'd like to rethink that doesn't so much build capacity? Anything you learned that doesn't?
Anything you've learned that doesn't build capacity? I think something we've made a big change with is demonstrations or come see me teach, opening doors, making sure that teachers of all levels are doing that work, not just your 15 or 20-year veteran who's an expert, but teachers in the beginning of their craft, that year 1, 2, and 3 teacher, opening their door up for like-minded peers in the same place, so they can see what that process looks like. You don't jump from being a year 1, CGI, first-time teacher to 10 years of practice. There's a process, and there's value in that process, and learning for both, right? When you're teaching in front of people, learning from the teacher and learning from the learners in the room. So I think we've really changed what we've done in that perspective. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Other districts?
Hi, we're from Roland Unified. Okay, what practices build capacity? We do have on-site coaches at our school sites. We have site-focused areas. These are long-term areas that every school is working on. We have a culture of trust. We do have COPs that kind of align with the focus areas that we've already been doing. Culture of trust between the site and our districts. We're encouraged to be risk takers. Teachers work at each site, work towards that same goal. We do have an RUSD framework. The teachers that are working towards that same goal, for example, if your school is reading, they're all working towards becoming experts in reading, Reader's Workshop. They kind of swim into other areas like math and science, and sustain questions and refine answers over time.
Thank you.
And then areas in Roland that we still have growth would be kind of leaning back towards a cookie cutter approach occasionally in classrooms that we see, and we're trying to get away from that. Some of that's fed into by having them go to the textbook, to the publishers, and saying, okay, teach to fidelity, which pulls us away from our focus areas and really are getting into what are the students' needs. There's also the tradition, the classroom seats, the way things are in classrooms that have been for many years. That kind of that's a pull towards that, and we're trying to get away from. And when we don't explicitly make those connections for our teachers and our staffs, that all the work we're doing does connect between writing, reading, math, the PBIS work we're doing. When we don't make those explicit connections, then it splinters us, and that hinders our growth.
Since we're Roland, we're also a Roland table. So we talked a little bit about the evolution and the history. Our relationship with Coaching goes back 11 years, but what we found was we had a lot of pockets, and things were happening at schools, but it was by teacher choice. It wasn't necessarily everybody on site doing the same practice. So I can speak to my school. We had CGI, readers, and writers happening, but not all three necessarily in one class and in different areas. We were lucky in that we had our role days, and we were able to have teachers participate in COPs and learn more. So our non-coach and teachers were able to access and learn and implement a lot of the pedagogy in the classroom. And then we had a different,
Thanks. Then we had a little bit of a different time, and we've come through it, and what we're seeing, just like they said earlier, we have school cohorts who have a focus. So we have inquiry, CGI, writer's workshop, or readers, and the schools are working in triads to really become experts in one particular area. And it's fantastic because we have the outside people coming in. They're people who have been using the practice for many years are able to mentor those who aren't. It's seen as this is district-wide. We've had the PD, we're doing it. It's not, I have a choice. It's a consensus from their peers as well. So if you're a 4th grade teacher, you expect that your 3rd grade people are teaching workshops so that you can build on that. And we've had whole conversations with that as a staff. And then when I talk with my staff and when we talk about living in it for a few years and then moving on to the next pedagogy. So we build our instructional toolbox so that they have multiple inquiry-based pedagogies rather than just focusing on the one for perpetuity.
But there's that consistent theme between
The consistent theme between the inquiry of knowing your students and learning about your students so that you can give them individualized learning. And our coaches is a big part of that. We have coaches that work with our teachers around our practices, and they've just built so much trust with the teachers that they're willing to take chances with them. Not that they wouldn't take chances with us, it's a different relationship. So they're peers, they're more comfortable, they will teach, co-teach, and that just has really built up the trust.
So, good morning, everyone. We are from Downey Unified here, and our friends with our colleagues from El Segundo Unified, and we just kind of talked about the commonalities within our districts. We have instructional learning teams, or we have instructional leadership teams in Downey Unified, and they have what they call learning teams in El Segundo, but it's really just kind of schools that are working together within the school sites to build capacity. We also talked about coaches and the role in coaches, so I'm glad she brought that up previously in building capacity and working with our teachers hands-on. And I think some areas of growth that we talked about are continuing, and we saw the power of those classroom visits there, about getting teachers to visit other teachers and what's happening there, and that's an area that both of us as districts are continuing to develop and want to continue to grow.
Good morning. We're from Whittier City and Tustin Unified. So together I think we found a lot of synergy in that I feel like both of our districts are really trying to replicate mini COTSNs in our own district. So taking the principles that we know that have worked through COTSN, the first one being the coaching model. So both of our districts definitely have a really strong coaching model in practice that's supporting those signature practices that are at our sites. And then secondly, we've also both invested in those outside mentors, those consultant companies that are providing that layer of expertise to really single out for our teachers what are the best practices so that we're engaging in best practice work rather than task work, as you were saying. And then we got really into a little bit of a conversation about what is the other element of COTSN that really brings about that transformation, and we agreed some of it is that personalization. So how do you bring that personalization into your district for your teachers? One of the ways that we've tried to do it is by empowering our teachers to create some of their own professional development. Whether it's online, we offer some mentor courses that have linked up with, we created a day of innovation where they had to come up with their own learning and their own outcome for their day. And we found that to be really in alignment with the work that COTSN set out, and what they believe in is making sure that teachers have choice. So doing that district-wide has really profited some good results for us. Thanks.
Good morning, we're from Monrovia Unified. And so I'm hearing a lot of similar themes that we discussed at our table. So some of the things that our practices build capacity in our district. They have a culture of collaboration And for example, two of our schools which have active partnerships with COTSN, there's a lot of reflection going on. Some of it, it's a structure where they have time to reflect, but also just the nature of the process where they're very reflective as teachers as they're trying these new practices. We also pay a lot of attention to mindset, not just in our students, but our teachers. So as was mentioned about a mindset towards improvement or growth, that we know that teachers who have a certain mindset are eager to get feedback about how to improve. On the other hand, if teachers don't have that mindset, it can be more difficult. Also, we pay attention to the level of trust, knowing that when teachers have trust or feel trust within the building, with the district, it's more conducive to their improvement. We have a culture of peer coaching, a lot of collegiality within schools and across schools as well. And we've had some fruitful partnerships with organizations like Focus Schools. We have instructional leadership teams at every school site, and that's helped to build coherence at each school site, developing a shared vision of what improvement looks like. And so we also have some opportunities to grow in terms of building capacity. And we know that there are teachers still who are fearful or reluctant to be observed or to observe others. And it's easy for some teachers to be too focused on completing tasks, getting through the pacing plan or the curriculum, and that can undermine their capacity growth.
Hi, good afternoon or good morning. We're from Whittier Unified, and some of our strengths to build capacity include we have lab days for each of our grade levels where they're released at my school 3 times a year. And what we do is that grade level is released, they plan a lesson together, they go and execute that lesson in a classroom, and then we come back and we debrief both the instruction and student work, and then we reflect on both the instruction and student work and next steps. So those lab days have really built capacity because we're working with our own students and our own grade levels. Another thing that we have are teacher collaborative time that's provided by the district. So once a month during our staff meetings, the district will extend it for an hour to pay our teachers, and they get to discuss a topic. So this year we're doing English language arts for wonders. Next year my school will be doing CGI math, and we'll get to plan together and kind of do the same kind of cycle. We call it repeater cycle plan. Kind of like the plan, do, study, hack cycle, but they get to work with one another. They also have that at the middle school level, but they call it hubs instead. It's very similar. Something that we still need to grow upon is sharing all our knowledge with our 4 schools, because we are a small district, so sharing what we're doing at each of the schools to help build capacity that way as well with our schools.
Hi, good morning. We have a very diverse table. We have a table of administrators and mentors from LA Unified, from Fountain Valley, as well as Fullerton. And we're all in different parts of our journey. We have schools that are in our second round. We have schools that have ended their rounds, and we have schools that have ended COTSN quite some years back. And we had a very interesting conversation because we're very hungry for more information of what do we do to build capacity if we're ending our round, if we are starting our round. And so what we talked about and shared just some practices such as instructional rounds and opening our doors. For us, we spoke to having very fearful teachers of opening their doors to now a staff that's very open about saying, I'm not an expert, but I will open my doors to share. This may be the first time doing this, but you're welcome to see. And that took some time because it was not a top-down approach. And even with the topics that are formed through instructional rounds of what the staff wants to see, it comes organically from the staff. And professional development and workshops look different, where it's not a program where you're saying you have to now have this in your classroom and the accountability, but kind of a PD. Yes, you learn from that training, but at the same time, the coaching model and the support it needs at the site level to support to make sure teachers are well supported before you have that expectation. We've had a school here to share too that Coatson's been still very live in their school, although they're not in their round. So meaning there wasn't a change in administration. They had the same only 3 administrators in the last 40 years. 4. And that's also a big aha too, because then you have the consistency. We had a school share also that it was, balanced literacy and CGI non-negotiables, and just a change in the community from that, the support from the community needed as well from the parent community in order for that to happen. So just a lot of interesting conversations where we are in our journey, and we just love and appreciate the time to be able to share that, because like we said before, we're very hungry for that information. What are some of the next steps for us in that journey?
Thank you. Well, that was a really nice point to close on, because what you said about being hungry for information about the next steps, how do you keep the momentum going if you no longer have an active Coatson cohort in your school or districts. That's at the nub of why we wanted to have this event today, and why we wanted to make sure there was plenty of time for you to be talking to each other. It's great to hear so many common themes, and I hope you'll be taking note of what's happening in what districts, and be able to follow up with each other. How does that exactly work in your district when you do that? Since I've been working with Coatson, I've always felt like there's sort of a latent network of these like-minded districts that they've worked in over the years, and I think moving towards strengthening that, making it more of a formal network to keep that momentum going.